On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who missed our earlier episode, Into the Heart of the Himalayas, Jono Linen in Conversation Prajwal Parajuli, you can catch this on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, and on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest. Our next session today is Chosen Spirits, Samit Basu in conversation with Deepanjana Pal. In a fraught world of climate change, 24-hour surveillance, and the degeneration of the public and private self, author and screenwriter Samit Basu's most recent book, Chosen Spirits, paints a disturbing picture of present realities. Shortlisted for the 2020 JCB Prize for Literature, the book presents a futuristic Delhi, lost to the control of mass surveillance and the catastrophic impact of technology. In conversation with author and journalist Deepanjana Pal, Basu takes us through his world of Orwellian satire and anti-dystopian fiction. Samit Basu is an Indian novelist and filmmaker. His latest novel, Chosen Spirits, is on the shortlist for the JCB Prize. Basu has published several novels since 2003, including the Game World Fantasy Trilogy and the Turbulence series. Several of his books have been published internationally and have been bestsellers in India. Deepanjana Pal is the author of the thriller Hushabye Baby and the Puchku series of children books, and The Painter, a biography of the pioneering artist Raja Ravi Verma. Remember, all our sessions that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Please do remember to ask questions and comment by typing it into the comment section. And in case you drop off due to bandwidth issues, just log back onto our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And in case we drop off, hang in there and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Chosen Spirits, Samit Basu in conversation with Deepanjana Pal. Samit, Deepanjana, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's very weird to be doing this because one, you'd think we wouldn't need JLF to facilitate a conversation between two friends, but here we are. But also there's this thing called flow in Chosen Spirit, Samit Basu's new novel, which you've just heard about, which makes it very weird to be having an online conversation with you right now. But since that's what we do these days, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you to JLF for organizing a chat between old friends. And Samit, congratulations on the novel being shortlisted.
Thanks very much. It adds yet another layer of strangeness to the totally not at all strange year that we've all been having. I had nothing to do with selecting the year that this book would come out in. But I have to say that it has helped in making the book and everything that happens in it seem very normal. And also, before we get further into it, may I just say that you need to be present at every online books discussion, because your background in conjunction with the overall kind of books are still stylish visual theme that you have going on here is just tremendous. And yeah.
I will let my mother and father know this is their doing. So I approve of their aesthetic. I have raised them well, I think.
And it explains so well. It explains everything.
Okay, but before I did want to actually, of course, talk to you about the specificity of Chosen Spirits in this particular year. But before that, will you give for us, for those of us who haven't read the book, will you just introduce it a little bit?
Right. So Chosen Spirits is a novel set approximately a decade in the future. It's set in Delhi, and its protagonists are two people who are privileged and who kind of have the option of being safe if they play safe and they kind of turn away from all the turmoil around them. But who are, as like many people we know in the present day, very troubled by everything that's going on around them. they both work well. One of them is a fairly senior kind of producer, manager, editor figure in what is called the Flow, which is a sort of decade in the future combination of live streaming, online gaming, reality TV, and TV news, which have all kind of mingled into this one giant decade from now influencer starring MASH. And the other is a sort of childhood friend of hers who's estranged from his family, from his very rich and very problematic, as we say, family, who she drags into working in this environment. And these are not people who really feel like they either have the ability or really the desire to change the world, solve everyone's problems, or anything like that. But they find themselves changing in response to the many troublesome things that are happening around them. What they essentially want is a happy and normal life. And so this novel is the story of how they utterly fail at finding one.
So like you said, it's set 10 years in the future. So the present day informs that future very, very directly. And it was something that I kept thinking about because, so for those of us who don't know, I spent a year in Delhi a few years ago. And at that point of time, Samit was my neighbor, essentially. And a recurring motif in our conversations, because we are masochist writers, would be I would ask him, how's your new project going? And his standard answer would be that, well, my research pile has reached about here, meaning about 3 inches above his head. And I'm getting there. I'll start writing. I'm getting there. And the research that you did into all the sort of near future tech, as well as the things that were happening around us, seems to have informed Chosen Spirits very, very directly.
Absolutely.
While I want to know about, other things, but to begin with, I remember one of the things that you were sort of, excited by was just the amount of ideas that you were getting from your research. How did you narrow down to decide what it is that you want Chosen Spirits to be? Because the book is very clearly about two people who begin as trying to cut off from the society that they're in, the world and the society that they're in, and then getting plugged in a very sort of real way, not a virtual way, and plugging themselves in to be able to facilitate certain kinds of change.
Yeah.
How did you come to that? How did you narrow down your focus?
It was a very long, as you say, process. And also it was a very confusing one because I had started off wanting to sort of write a serial story about, say, the next half century in this subcontinent. And
I like how your goals are just, just modest, just half century of the subcontinent.
Yeah. So the problem is you start off with a lot of free time and you think that will take care of everything. Unfortunately, whenever you start researching, and this is actually something I want to ask you about, but you start researching, and then every book you read leads to 6 more books you have to read, right? And then I'd also set myself the not at all ambitious plan of mapping the future of climate change, politics, technology, automation, migration, all of that, right? So then some years passed, and so then and I'm glad you remember. So I was completely lost with and my life is fairly disorganized, but my notes organization is on point. Like if I really want to intimidate new writers, I can just show them the left side of my Scrivener research pile where I don't know how many hundreds of sub notes I have on everything. So, but when I started writing it, and the first part of this multi-part story was supposed to be set about a decade in the future. Just the sheer amount of chaos in the real world around us made it very unrealistic to kind of map any logical progression of events. In the sense that when you're seeing a daily news format where every day there's a crisis happening that should alter the future of the country, if not the world, and then the next day it completely disappears in a whole new crisis, and suddenly you have a stack of crises and none of them appear to be going anywhere, though actually all of them are. And I realized that, trying to build this logical framework based on what is going to happen with climate or technology or any kind of logic derived mass common sense politics approach was going to become so speculative that it would lose all touch with the present day. And that's not something that I wanted to do, which led to deciding that, 10 years from now is when the whole story would be set. And I would not give either myself nor the characters the problem of fixing the world in any sense. But if I could get them to some point of internal change, if I could get them to at least, engagement from apathy, or figuring out what they were doing wrong and how they could do better. And in the first place, inspiring, have events occur which inspired them in the first place with the desire to do better. And so along the way, I also decided to kind of abandon every writing structure or, the things that I felt like I learned how to do not very well, obviously, but I relatively learned how to do down the almost last 2 decades of doing this, whether in books or comics or films or all of that. I decided to not rely on any of those, but also just kind of figure out the book as it happened. So technically speaking, it was a very interesting but also very difficult book to write, because not least because I had to keep rewriting it. So I had a draft done of this book some point in 2018, but right up to finally submitting the book this year in January, I was changing large parts of it. A lot of the really dramatic events in the news kept happening ahead of schedule. So let's say certain disasters which I had scheduled for 2024 were happening in March.
Just disobediently showed up in 2020.
So there was a lot of, it's like the bottom 7 layers of the cake are pretty much what they are. But the person whose birthday it is, their names have changed. And it's now no longer their birthday. So, but you've already done the icing. So it was a lot of that.
So like very quickly into the book, you have references to things that have happened in 2019 and 2020. Yeah. And also stuff that was happening in early 2020, which is, I think from a writing perspective, it's horrifying to think that the author was sitting and adding these things at the last minute.
Yeah.
Because the book was out by April, and you have been able to bring in references to things that were happening as late as February, I think.
Yeah.
Which makes it, on one hand, feel really very current, but it's also a very angry book because it's got so much of the rage at all the things that are falling apart and not working well, censorship, oppression, inequalities, all of these things showing up. And I was wondering, when you were saying that, it's a difficult book to write, I'm sure, all books are difficult to write, but some I think end up feeling more challenging than others. And I was wondering whether you were conscious about creating a balance between the messaging that you want and the narrative that needs to come out. Because one of the things that I think we struggle with generally in literature, not just you and me as humans, but writers in general across the world, you want something to feel relevant and be relevant and have a certain idealism contained within it. But as a storyteller, you also want the story to be strong. You don't want the messaging to overpower the story, I imagine. At least I wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
So was that something that you struggled with, or was that something that, bothered you at any point?
It was a bother all the way through. And this was something where for this book, it was far more difficult to handle than for anything I'd written previously. And this was, it is a very angry book. And I had also decided fairly early into writing it that I try and have a lot of fun when I'm writing a book. I try and really enjoy myself when I'm writing the scenes, when I'm setting the plot. I love throwing big twists in. I love, whenever things allow to have a lot of pace and action and movement and people being quippy and all of that. And I decided not to do that because it felt like it was sort of trivialize the kind of necessary doom and gloom that you want in the backdrop. And having decided that, it was a question really of focusing, because and this is something that I think you'll relate to, because when you're writing your artist biography, or when you're writing your thriller / crime / literary novel, or when you're writing children's work, there's a point at which you kind of manage to make yourself enter. I'm assuming, please tell me if I've got it completely wrong. But there's a point at which you've managed to immerse yourself in the world of the book, right? And while of course it's different, each book is different in terms of your process of doing it, or in terms of how you're feeling when you're doing it. It's really a question of figuring out what the world is that you're inhabiting, and reaching that point of relative comfort where you know that the story is what it's supposed to be. This is sounding a bit mystical when I'm saying it, but it was so for example, adjusting the level of, say, science fiction in this book, right? Now I know that somewhere a few notes down there are talking robots. I really want to have talking robots if I've designed them, but it felt like 10 years from now is possibly too early for them to be major characters. So having sort of forced myself into this concrete bubble of you will be disciplined in what you allow the world to be, then it got easier,
But there's a lot of stuff that you've put in there, which is, I mean, it's already here. Like, for example, the tattoos.
Yeah.
They're almost a work in progress, and they are a work in progress. And I don't think it'll actually even take 10 years for those to show up. These tattoos in Chosen Spirits that essentially end up being like biomarkers, and that can be monitored by somebody outside, a company essentially outside can monitor your health stats and stuff.
So it's an advanced smartphone.
It's biosurveillance.
No, so most of the tech here is stuff that is already being designed. A lot of that has already been produced. So it's not like there was a lot of science fiction invention in the book, because all of it is going to happen, and not because I predicted it's going to happen. Most of it has been designed. So it was more a question of figuring out where it might be approximately a decade from now. The challenge there was really kind of putting it together. An example I've used before is that, say, when you're watching a show like Black Mirror, your each episode, so to speak, is you're looking at a particular axis of technology-led dystopia, right? A new thing has come, everyone likes it. Oh wait, it's horrible. Oh, we're all having a really bad time now, and we either relatively escape or things get even worse, and your episode ends, right? But if you then designed a world where 8 of these episodes were happening together and all set in the same time, mapping that was what made the years tick by.
Tell me something. You've worked now over the years. You've worked in film. You've worked in pure text. While writing this one, did any of your film writing and filmmaking inform the writing for the novel itself?
I think what happens is that when you start work in a new medium or a new genre or a new kind of, a new football team division of this whole storytelling league, I think things tend to inform your overall awareness of what you're doing rather than specific projects. Because, so for example, if you do a certain amount of comics work, then you become much better at writing shorter things, because that's the most extremely constrained. You have to tell this much story in this much space, and most of the pages will be visuals. So after doing comics, my books became shorter than 500 pages. It was not difficult anymore. The act of containment was not. So with film, for example, I think where film helped a lot was with more the environments in the book, in the sense that the world of film development and film production is a very different say chaotic playground than the chaotic playground of publishing or media, which I was a bit more familiar with. So it helped map certain characters, or it helped me figure out what the influencers of a decade from now might be like, what the producers or the slightly sinister figures who control their lives, what they would be like, what kind of very succinct and very true, but also very brutal, you know, ways that they could reduce culture down to a sentence or two to decide what people should be doing with their lives. So these are things where it's much nicer to have had exposure to that sort of person in reality. And that I could not have had without engaging with Bollywood.
The character of Joey, who is, I think it's safe to say that she's the protagonist of Chosen Spirits. Because Rudra plays an important part, but he comes in much later. And I think we see most of the world through Joey's eyes.
Yeah.
Why did you want, not why did you, but when did you decide that this was going to be a female protagonist? And what is the challenge of you as a man writing a female protagonist?
Right. Well, see, normally for most of the books before this, I will write through the eyes of every possible character that I can, and I will not think about whose point of view should I be looking out of. With this book, since it talks a lot more about social realities, it was a much harder decision to make because when you're talking about a fairly harsh environment, the temptation is always to have a kind of street level protagonist character who's going through the very worst of it physically and emotionally. But while it's something I would have done without a second thought if I had designed a secondary world and just had, a character in this completely constructed world going through whatever they were going through, that would have been fine. But for this book, I could not. I thought it would be a bit aggressive to have protagonists be characters who were considerably less privileged than I am in real life, if that makes sense. So, because if you look at what's going on around us now, I find it. And as someone who's always had a perhaps unreasonable pride in having an imagination, etc., I find it completely impossible to imagine what people are going through in the present day, and I would find it both difficult emotionally and difficult craft-wise to see through the eyes of someone who's suffering the worst of what society has to offer, even in the present day. With regards to Joey being a woman, I think I wanted two protagonists and I wanted them to be broadly in the same social demographic as I was, though one of them was clearly going to be rich and disengaged and also have a lot of privilege and also be given a lot of freedom, and that could only be a man. Because a woman in Rudra's place would have far more pressures on her. She wouldn't be allowed to escape her rich and troublesome families and go live in Kalkaji and play video games. And would not be given that space to, he's just off for a while, he'll come back and take over the family business. That would not happen. In Joey's case specifically, because I find that most of the characters in this book are based on people I actually know. And I find that most of the people I know who are put in these positions of extreme responsibility, where they're basically running the show and they're having to make it succeed despite the organizations they're working for. And they're expected to be on top of 15 things at the same time, but also expected to have empathy and to treat people well and to actually be concerned about how to do better. I know people like this, and I have to say they're all women. The ones I know, at least. So, and kind of also having seen how men and women engage positions sort of parallel to this in the entertainment industry, in the influencer industry, and so on, it somehow seemed like a character who possessed all the shall we say features that I needed this character to have would most likely be a woman.
So did any of the women who have inspired Joey get back to you saying that I kind of see myself in her?
Not in a good way.
Oh no.
So there my excuse was that character is mostly me as well. Right, so there's always that escape.
It was a cop out though.
Yeah. It was a complete cop out. But also, I felt that while, of course, it is a bit of a leap outside, and especially given what's going on in the world around us, it is. For the first time, I was thinking about things like appropriation and should this character be a woman or should it just be a man? But it is so much easier for men to face the problems that Joey faces and deal with them with a mixture of kind of just aggressively bad behavior while not looking to improve the scene at all, that I felt that here it was okay to make that leap a little bit.
So since you mentioned appropriation, this was something that I wanted to ask you about as well. Because it's such a, Chosen Spirits, I think is, I mean, it's angry, but it's also very consciously idealistic. And in that sense, I think the idealism runs through a lot of your earlier works as well, but it's far more subtle and it's much more pronounced in Chosen Spirits. And it's quite clear that you are having conversations with yourself as a writer about certain power dynamics and the inequalities. And when you're doing that, when you're thinking about how to write a woman character, how to place or present a Dalit character, did you find this in any way restrictive? And I'm asking you this because this is a conversation that we tend to encounter all the time, where there will be people who will say that allegations of cultural appropriation, expectations of being representative in a respectful way, are curtailing the writer's imagination, are hemming a writer in rather than letting their imagination take flight, as it were.
Right.
Did you feel constrained by political correctness?
I didn't feel constrained so much. This is something that I chose to do for this book. And also it was more interesting than constraining, because normally I give myself so much freedom in my books to do whatever the hell I want, that trying to add those filters deliberately to the writing process was something that A, was wholly a choice, B, was not something that I looked on as a constraint, as so much of I have to keep this in mind as well.
It's also, I mean, to me at least, a lot of it is really about respecting your own subject. Like if you as a writer have chosen to write about X thing, if you truly respect it, then you will do the research and the work that needs to be done in order to represent that subject correctly and accurately.
Yeah.
I've never understood why it should make someone feel restrained. It hasn't made sense to me, which is why I was wondering whether you did, because you have made very conscious decisions here.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's an angry, idealistic book. It's very aware. Like there are conversations about, from Me Too to cultural appropriation to social inequality, all of these subjects, you find different ways of bringing them in. And mostly through Joey, we sort of see a pragmatic, idealistic point of view, often touched with a kind of helplessness. So, I mean, that's why I was wondering whether you did at any point feel like, oh, but I can't write this? Or did you feel like, this is how I need the story to go, so that's how it's going to move?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't feel particularly burdened with it, in the sense that once the decision has been made that this book should in some way, while being speculative, try to keep as close a grip on reality as possible. And since it was very clear that the focus of a fair amount of book would be everything that you listed, it was therefore necessary as part of the craft to just read more and try not to make huge blunders. I'm sure I've still ended up making some, but it's just like I don't know. It's just the nature of the book that you're in. So I'm sure that I will write other books where, if they're hugely different, will not require so much thought about getting tone right, or getting, say, race relations between people of Korean origin and people of East African origin who live in Delhi under various circumstances. There'll just be characters involved in a fast-moving plot, if that book has a fast-moving plot, because there simply won't be so much time for them in that story to think about the multi-layered nature of their relationships. But for this book, this is what has to be done.
And given you folded so much of the present everyday world into it, and got people to lash out, react, be placed in different situations where they can get their points across. Did the book feel cathartic to finish it? Did it feel cathartic?
No, uh, not at all, really, because say everything that we've discussed in the last in the last few minutes of this conversation, it's also the kind of thing where you're convinced you've got everything horribly wrong, and that everyone who reads the book will immediately, either ignore it completely or call you up and say, listen, here is a list of 50 things that you completely messed up at. So there was no catharsis so much as there was just a sense of, I really want these characters to make it through the book, which was strange because I was designing the book and I knew what was going to happen to them.
Right.
So while in most books there's been so far a sense of, oh, I'm eager for them to arrive at the ending because I can't wait for them to meet the surprises I have set in store for them. Here there was much more of a sense of, oh my God, what are you going to do now?
And did characters do things differently? Like, did you change from your original ideas of what you wanted them to do, end up as?
No, strangely, no, because this time I followed the characters. Normally, I try to set a map for characters and they don't obey it. They wander off and then I have to deal with that. But here, I gave up on that entirely because it was just a question of, listen, you're in the situation. I don't know what you're going to do. You'll probably mess it up horribly, but I'm interested in seeing what you do. And there isn't a lot of action in this book. As in, there is, I try and keep it as quick as possible. But look, I mean, I'm saying this in context of my other books where usually there's a world to be saved and there are fights to be had and there are dragons to be fought.
Monsters and robots and things like that.
Absolutely. So here it felt like, listen, you guys are privileged. You have an easy life. Anytime you feel like noping out of this, just do it. Go home, play video games. Things will be fine. But I don't want you to do that.
Right. We'll be opening up to audience questions soon, but just before we do that, I got the sense by the end of the book that there was a sequel coming up. And obviously one must never ask a writer whether they're working on a sequel, but are you working on a sequel?
I have the homework done for several sequels.
I think you have the homework done for several series. So let's not talk about the homework. What are you actually writing?
No, frankly, I don't know. I haven't written a word since I finished writing this book, right? So here again, like my protagonist, I'm following my own inactions with interest and wondering where they will lead. And before we open up to audience questions, Deepanjana, no, this is not just from me, but from various other well-wishers of yours. Since you have cunningly trapped me into sort of, meandering around long explanations about my own work, what is your next book? And when are you writing it?
I have written nothing this year, and I'm happy to say that there are audience questions coming in. So we will gently swerve in that direction. Okay, so Aparajita asks, in a world where reality is stranger than fiction, what is the future for dystopian novels? And do you believe they will change in character?
Thing is, with dystopian novels, I think reality will kind of be better and worse simultaneously everywhere in the world, depending on where you are. I don't really know whether dystopian novels will change in character, but I do know that a lot more books like mine will accidentally be called dystopian novels, even though they're not. Right? So, if I were more of an expert on dystopian novels, and I'm not, like I've read the basic classics, but it's also something where you can see the horrible ending coming from very early on, and I need a little hope to get me through these really big books, because it's not like the outside is endlessly comforting and cheery, and there's a lot of good other there's a wide range of other things to see and read. So I don't know where dystopian novels will go. I hope they go somewhere nice. If they go somewhere nice, I'll go with them.
Okay, so Aranya has asked, how was your experience writing and co-directing House Arrest? Does the writing style change through different mediums?
See, with House Arrest, first of all, it was a matter of immense privilege to get to have that experience. Because seriously, who gets to co-direct a film and who gets to write a film? and many people. And the truth is, I've been trying and failing to do that for over a decade. But having said that, just given the sheer number of people who dash themselves against the walls of the film industry and just get nowhere, I think it was amazing as an experience to be able to do that. Having also said that, if you're someone who's used to writing books, and while no one is in control of the publishing process, at least when you're building the thing, it's yours, right? So from that to 100 people screaming at the same time in a language you barely speak and looking to you for answers, and the story changing every day because some light has gone missing, and 15 kinds of trouble happening at the same time, nothing has made me want to go back to writing books more. Having said that, I do want to make more films, and and it works both ways. So if I spend a couple more years in complete isolation, slowly going nuts and working on one book, I will want the chaos of a film set. So that's what that experience was like.
Okay, Ramaya has asked, what explains the lack of good science fiction and fantasy films in India?
Bollywood explains the lack of good science fiction and fantasy films in India.
I mean, if it doesn't get more fantastical than Bollywood, surely.
Absolutely. So, one of the problems is, apart from that short and actually accurate answer, is that it's very, like Bollywood in itself requires so much, shall we say, willing suspension of disbelief mostly. And mostly SF and fantasy films will require large budgets and will require stars. And that's a whole other framework of chaos, right? So every film, every big film getting made in itself could be the basis of a large science fiction fantasy project. But I don't want to be dismissive of it, because good films have been made and good films will be made. I thought Cargo, which was out on Netflix recently, is a very interesting example of kind of indie sci-fi. Set on a spaceship, there's an afterlife, there are Rakshasas technically. But now with some context, I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to make and release that film and to have it be the film that it was. So, but a short answer is, what prevents a lot of good SF and fantasy filmmaking in India is the industry that they have to operate in. There's no lack of talent.
And not that, Ramaya, you actually want me to answer this, but since I'm the one asking the questions, I will exercise my privilege and give you an answer anyway. I think what also explains to some extent the lack of generally good filmmaking, but particularly fantasy and sci-fi, is that our filmmakers and film writers don't read enough. If they read more books, both from India and outside India, we would have better storytelling across the board, but particularly for fantasy, because fantasy works within a certain kind of structure and tropes and worlds which work in very specific ways that you learn from literature. And if you don't have exposure to that and you think that it just comes out of your head, well, it doesn't. Okay.
You're so much better at this than I am.
Please, no need only. Okay, Abhimanyu Sharma has asked, are you working on a new web series?
No.
Short answer, there we go. Please work on a new web series.
Sure.
Kavya Mathur has asked, there's no Facebook or YouTube or Instagram in the realm of chosen spirits. Where did that idea come from? And what are your thoughts about capital surveillance and the future of social media? I feel that's the whole book, but do go on.
Yeah. I mean, so in the book, Facebook and Instagram and everything that is there now still exists, but the kind of the core of everyone's attention has moved into the union of all of these things on a larger scale, which is the flow. I think Facebook and unless those companies are running the new thing, I don't know. But otherwise, those are still around. But those are sort of now the new long form. So say TikToks.
Flow to me really felt like Instagram Live. Like it just felt when I was reading the book and I was reading about what the Flow stars are doing and how they're trying to figure out who the new Flow star will be. I really felt like I was seeing half of those every time I logged on to Instagram.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where it came from.
There you go. Okay. Shubhankar Bhattacharya wants to know if there was one song by a particular band which best encapsulates the spirit of Chosen Spirits, which one would it be?
I have no answer for that. Something that will be current and very popular a decade from now, which spares me that length of time for having an answer for that. I get very distracted by music because I start listening to the words and then I start thinking about the thing, or the tune gets stuck into my head, and then that it doesn't help me write at all. So I try and avoid it as much as possible when I'm writing, which explains my generally bleak demeanor also.
Yes, you're a very grim person. It's true.
Yeah.
But so when you're writing, you don't use music at all. Like do you need silence?
No, it's because I can't have silence.
You live
It
in
doesn't exist in our country. Um, but no, I am such an expert. Like, the one thing that I know I've become infinitely better at over the last 17 or 18 years of writing is that I can distract myself with nothing. So if you give me actual music and it's good, I'm done. I'm done for the day.
Right.
So,
Okay, we have two questions, so we'll do this quickly. Zoya has asked, did the idea of house arrest inspire you to write Chosen Spirits?
no, not at all, actually. House arrest was an idea I had in 2011 or 2012 when I was trying to get various large budget science fiction fantasy films made and going through a whole parade of nonsense. And I was determined to write a film that was so small that it could not be produced. So I wrote a film set in a plant.
Okay. Aditi has asked, there are references to real places like Nehru Place and real incidents like the Shaheen Bagh protests, among other things. Is this the first time you have blended your fantasy with reality?
No, actually, it's I've done this before in the Turbulence series. There was not only mapping of real world places where I hadn't been, but you could see on Google World View or whatever that thing is called, and places where I had actually been were also in that book. For Resistance, cities that I'd never actually been to were also in that book, and where I meticulously plotted out the movements of everyone on Google Maps and gave myself the excuse that no one's actually been. And that book was also set in the future, in 2020 actually, at the time. So no one had actually been to those future cities. So my not having been there either was not so much of a problem. I've also written kids books which are set entirely in the real world. So I don't really see writing as like switching between genres as a very different thing. So it just depends on what the settings are for the world of each book.
Yeah, and if you have not read the Turbulence series, I would highly recommend it. I think Turbulence particularly, I think, is one of the most enjoyable books that you could read, and especially when everything is falling apart like it is right now. Turbulence is the kind of alternate reality that I would very happily sink into. Right. Final question, because after that we will be chased off from here. Rohan Sarkar asks, what are your favorite books and could you recommend some for your fans from South India?
Would I recommend my fans from South India?
Oh, could you recommend some books for your fans from South India?
Okay. Yeah, see, this is a problem. I can recommend 100 books for you, and it's impossible in the confines of this to start. I've completely blanked out on what I'm currently reading, though I'm 3 books into a lovely series. But I would say read, if you're starting off in, say, fantasy and SF reading, you couldn't do better than starting with N.K. Jemisin. Or if you want to start with the classics, start with Ursula Le Guin. Or look, there are thousands of different ways into reading. Follow Deepanjana's newsletter if you want really good reading recommendations. It is my favorite books newsletter, and she diligently reads across the range and writes eloquently about it. So follow Deepanjana's newsletter, especially if you're in South India and are a fan of mine, and you will get the best book recommendations that you could.
Thank you for that. And thank you for this conversation. I've had great fun. I hope you have had.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you so much, Deepanjana. And as Samit said, absolutely everybody should read her take that she puts out. Absolutely vital, and you'll get a sense of what book you should read. Thank you, Samit Basu. And what you said, the concept of silence in India doesn't even exist. What is that, in fact? And especially today on Gandhi Jayanti, where, with his many fasts of silence, I wish some of our television news channels and our media sort of took a page out of his particular book rather than the screeching that we hear in the name of news. But hey, thank you both for that fabulous conversation. Thank you all for listening. Um, I do hope you're going to log back on Wednesday, the 7th of October, to watch another set of great sessions on JLF Brave New World. We've got On Fire, the burning case for a Green New Deal. Naomi Klein in conversation with Kiran Trehan in association with the University of York and its student union, who joined forces with JLF's Brave New World to launch a new engagement platform, York Ideas, to present a compelling talk by Naomi Klein on the urgent need to combat the profound global impacts of the intersection of the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. Naomi's talk will be accompanied by the screening of a short film which was released yesterday and created by Molly Crabapple, The Message from the Future. It's really a beautifully done film. I had the privilege of seeing it yesterday. So do please log on to catch this on 7th of October. And this will be at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Standard Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And our second session is the print magazines, The Evolving Narrative, Radhika Jones in conversation with Supriya Dravid. The ever-changing landscape of print media in a post-pandemic world is important. When a generation of us have grown up with print as a medium, how do we work towards adapting our experience into an increasingly digital world? And this is at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. For those of you who may remember, please block your dates on the 4th of October for I Believe Art Matters. As many of you know, artists and artisans across the country have been hugely impacted. And given the large-scale need for financial assistance in the cultural sector, Teamwork is putting together I Believe Art Matters. It's a gala, it's fundraising and advocacy gala. And it's hosted by Shabana Azmi and Manoj Bajpai. It'll premiere on Teamwork's Facebook and YouTube pages. It runs for about 5 hours. There are 450 odd artists, everybody including A.R. Rahman, Salim Suleiman, Shekhar Rabjiani, the Shillong Chamber Choir, Dr. L. Subramaniam, Shabnam Birmani, Viku Vinayak Ram, Shiva Mani, Usha Uttup. We've got Nrityagram, the dance company, Aditi Mangaldas, Manjuri Chaturvedi, Malavika Sarukai. In theatre, we have Pia Bherupia, we have Shikhandi by Fazia Jalali, we've got Elephant in the Room, Nona by Gino Joseph, stand-up comedians, and much, much more. So please remember, block your time, 4th of October, which is Sunday, 5 p.m. onwards, and please help artists and artisans who are in need. Thank you, stay tuned, and look forward to seeing you back here on JLF's Brave New World. Till then, mask up, stay safe.